You stand there atop the gentle slope, beneath an unforgiving August sun, realizing slowly, and certainly far too late, that your choice of location today is spectacularly unfortunate. You gaze upward, shading your eyes from the blinding Mediterranean glare. The peak of Mount Vesuvius looms above, seemingly innocent, draped peacefully in olive groves and grapevines, sunlit and quiet as a sleepy village on a warm afternoon. But as you wipe sweat from your brow, you begin to understand that appearances, particularly geological ones, are often deceptive, especially in the year 79 AD. You'd expected scenic views. You'd come prepared for an enjoyable stroll, equipped with nothing more than a simple tunic, sandals, and the woeful lack of survival instincts typical of any ordinary citizen of the Roman Empire. Yet now, as your feet sink gently into the gritty volcanic soil, the irony of your circumstances begins to manifest itself quite clearly. This volcanic soil, which nourishes vineyards and olive orchards alike, this fertile ground that has made Pompeii and Herculaneum prosperous, will soon turn against all who depend on it, including, unfortunately, you. The people of Pompeii, obliviously continuing their bustling lives at the foot of this deceptively tranquil mountain, have no concept that catastrophe might fall upon them. You wonder briefly if that merchant selling figs down by the forum, or the baker sliding fresh bread from the hot oven, knows how fragile his peace truly is. You consider that perhaps ignorance is bliss, for if anyone here truly understood their predicament, no one would be calmly sipping wine in their shaded porticos or haggling over pottery in the markets. Pompeii, Herculaneum, Oplantis, all thriving towns nestled beneath this gentle looking mountain, owe their existence and their prosperity precisely to the fact that they lie atop rich volcanic earth. From the quiet fishermen tending nets along the coast to the wealthy senators reclining in lush gardens of their villas, everyone profits from the bountiful generosity of Vesuvius. Perhaps this explains why, despite sporadic earthquakes and occasional worrisome smoke, the locals stubbornly refuse to fear their most famous neighbor. You suppose human nature, ever optimistic, tends to interpret warning signs merely as minor inconveniences. As you continue your ill fated walk, you recall a rather dull scroll you once skimmed through out of sheer boredom, detailing Vesuvius's geological history. It was written by a scholar whose name you cannot recall, but whose tediousness you vividly remember. At the time, his exhaustive account of past eruptions and seismic activity felt unnecessarily detailed. But now, with a peculiar sense of dread, you recall that ancient writings described episodes of restless tremors and smoke columns as heralding a far worse fate. You pause momentarily, turning slowly to observe the sprawling town beneath you. The midday sun glints off terracotta rooftops, mosaics, and fountains. Beyond lies the tranquil azure sea, stretching toward the horizon. Small boats bob leisurely in the harbor, utterly unaware of any impending doom. Everything is peaceful, ordinary, and infuriatingly indifferent to your rising anxiety. The air itself seems heavier, pressing down upon you, Not just heat, but something else. You glance toward the vineyards again, feeling an odd sensation beneath your feet. Surely it is imagination. But then, unmistakably, the earth beneath you shifts ever so slightly, a mild tremble passing through your body. You look about, half expecting others to panic, to scream or flee, yet no one reacts. A shepherd nearby yawns, his sheep grazing serenely. A distant farmer continues methodically pruning his vines. Perhaps, you think bitterly, you're the only one sufficiently paranoid to notice the subtle warnings nature is offering. You recall now, with ironic clarity, how ancient Greek philosophers once theorized that beneath volcanoes lie vast chambers of fire, breathing underground rivers of molten rock like the furnaces of Vulcan himself. Romans, practical and rather cynical, mostly dismissed such vivid imagery, preferring instead to think volcanoes merely a quirk of geography, useful primarily for commerce and agriculture. Indeed, your own education focused on practical matters, arithmetic, rhetoric, and of course the endless cataloging of tedious historical facts, most of which seemed entirely disconnected from your ordinary life until today. Somewhere in the distance, a dog begins barking frantically, breaking your chain of thought. You wonder darkly if animals have a wisdom humans lack. Birds, too, are behaving oddly, swooping nervously overhead, circling as if confused by some unseen threat. Another gentle tremor, barely perceptible, travels up your legs, confirming your fears. Your mind cruelly reminds you that all too often, major disasters are preceded by subtle signs, signs ignored precisely because they are subtle. Glancing down, you spot tiny fissures spreading quietly beneath your sandals, insignificant now, but perhaps soon to widen into genuine cracks. You wonder bitterly how history will remember this day. Will the poets romanticize it as punishment from the gods? Will the historians depict your generation as foolishly unprepared, complacently content until too late? You grimace, suspecting the answer already. The sweat trickling down your face mixes with volcanic dust stirred by your feet, creating an uncomfortable, gritty paste. You think darkly how appropriate it is that you're being slowly coated in the very substance that soon may bury this entire region beneath meters of ash. This thought leads you inevitably to the cruel irony awaiting future generations of scholars who will sift meticulously through debris, uncovering ordinary moments petrified in disaster, bakers caught in mid-action, diners frozen forever in conversation, innocent wanderers trapped on slopes like yours, destined to become a curiosity for archaeologists. Indeed, perhaps centuries from now, some bored student like you once were will skim indifferently through scrolls, or perhaps some newer medium, some mysterious future method of record keeping about the great eruption of Vesuvius. Perhaps they'll read briefly, sigh, and return to their comfortable lives, unable to imagine the terror you now feel creeping up your spine. For a moment, you ponder leaving immediately, running down toward the shore, catching the first available ship, far away from this deceptively beautiful place. But curiosity, that uniquely human affliction, holds you in place. You feel compelled to remain a bit longer, watching the drama unfold, even as every sensible instinct urges flight. Standing alone upon these trembling slopes, gazing upward at the volcano's ominous quiet, you realize you are trapped in history's cruelest joke, fully aware of impending disaster, yet unable, or perhaps unwilling, to flee it. You shake your head ruefully, reflecting that history, especially the kind of history taught late at night to bored listeners hoping for sleep, has always been littered with such ironies. And so you wait, aware, bitterly amused, and deeply fearful, understanding now, more clearly than ever, that your quiet stroll atop Vesuvius is indeed not the best choice you have ever made. As you linger there, uncomfortably rooted to your spot on the trembling slopes of Vesuvius, you gradually become aware that the peace you enjoyed moments ago was but a fleeting illusion. Even the bright August sun, glaring down relentlessly upon you, cannot dispel the growing sense of unease now seeping slowly into your bones. The irony is not lost on you, for all the supposed advancement and civilization Rome claims. You are feeling distinctly primitive fears, exactly the fears your ancestors might have felt when facing mysterious natural events like thunder, eclipses, or volcanic eruptions. The ground beneath your feet trembles once more, slightly more insistently than before, as if the earth itself is gently coughing before deciding to unleash a much more forceful response. You look around nervously, almost embarrassed to find yourself caught in such a dramatically historical moment, armed only with cynical knowledge gained from years of formal education, none of which seems remotely comforting right now. As usual, irony serves only to highlight your predicament. Remembering your dull lessons in philosophy, you recall that the Romans, much like the Greeks before them, interpreted such terrifying events as direct interventions from the gods. To them, every natural disaster held symbolic significance, a divine message delivered with terrifying punctuation. Standing here, feeling increasingly insignificant before the ominous mountain looming above, you find yourself uncomfortably sympathetic to their views. You silently curse your previous arrogance. The certainty you once held in your sophisticated, enlightened worldview now dissolves under the intensity of Vesuvius's quiet menace. Perhaps Jupiter, Neptune, or even Vulcan himself really is displeased. Perhaps your professors, dismissing old myths with condescending laughter, underestimated the power of the ancients' insights. It seems horribly fitting that you, who always dozed off in lectures about the gods, now experience firsthand the precise scenario those dusty old stories warned about. From where you stand, you see a family approaching the vineyards, their small figures bustling cheerfully along winding paths. They carry baskets, preparing for harvest, utterly oblivious to any sign of danger. You grimace as you realize they will continue their routines as long as possible, unaware that each grape picked is another moment closer to disaster. This thought chills you deeply because it underscores the terrifying normality of human life just before tragedy strikes. In your discomfort, you recall Pliny the Elder, that renowned scholar whose obsession with the natural world bordered upon madness. His extensive work, Naturalis Historia sits collecting dust in libraries across the empire, frequently admired but rarely truly understood. In fact, Pliny himself claimed that earthquakes and eruptions were products of underground winds or subterranean fires. A rational man indeed, but even rationality seems inadequate when the ground beneath your feet keeps trembling insistently, mocking your confidence in scholarly explanations. You smile bitterly, thinking how calmly Pliny would react to your current situation. Probably, he would enthusiastically document each vibration, scribbling down detailed observations even as the world collapsed around him. Suddenly, you envy the ancients and their simplistic worldviews. To them, the mountain's anger would be clear enough reason to flee. But you, trapped in your enlightenment, remain paralyzed by doubt and rationalizations. Another rumble beneath your feet forces your attention back to reality. A distant roar, muted yet deeply ominous, escapes from somewhere deep inside Vesuvius, reverberating through the hills. You look up sharply. Wisps of pale gray smoke begin curling lazily from the summit, innocent looking enough at first glance, but carrying implications grim enough to freeze your blood. That gentle plume, so deceptively benign, is perhaps the mountain's silent warning, a clear sign, if one believes the ancients, that the gods are stirring from slumber and preparing to punish the arrogance of humanity. An old tale you once heard resurfaces. Vulcan, god of fire and metalwork, trapped beneath mountains, toiling endlessly, sometimes expressing displeasure through volcanic eruptions. Now you can vividly imagine him down there, hammering away, growing increasingly irritated by the trivial affairs of mortals who dared build their towns and villas at his doorstep. How many offerings had been forgotten or ignored by the complacent townspeople of Pompeii and Herculaneum? You shake your head grimly. Perhaps they, like you, were simply too busy enjoying life's comforts to heed subtle warnings from their disgruntled deity. Nearby, animals sense what humans ignore. Birds scatter erratically overhead, forming chaotic, swirling patterns across the sky, their calls piercing and unnerving. Dogs in the distant villages bark incessantly, as though attempting to warn their oblivious masters. Sheep abandon their calm grazing, milling anxiously in circles, bleating their distress in unison. You feel a pang of embarrassment. Creatures so humble, yet wiser than the supposedly enlightened beings around them. The ancients would have known precisely what these animal reactions meant. Meanwhile, your modern skepticism leaves you grasping helplessly for explanations that do not ease your rising panic. Your gaze drifts back to the horizon, toward the sea, shimmering blue and deceptively calm. Ships drift idly, sails gently billowing in the afternoon breeze. You wonder if sailors aboard those vessels, so distant from danger, have any inkling of impending calamity, or if they too will soon learn the harsh lesson that nature, or perhaps the gods, rarely distinguish between the innocent and guilty when disaster strikes. A sudden gust of hot air, tinged faintly with sulfur, rushes past, prickling your skin with its unnatural heat. Your mouth goes dry as you realize that nature is losing patience. Beneath your feet, the tremors grow ever more frequent and insistent, as if the mountain itself seeks to awaken the oblivious populace below. You sense that soon, very soon, humanity's smug confidence, your own included, will crumble before a force so primal and overwhelming that God seemed the only possible explanation. As you stare upward at the steadily thickening plume of smoke, you find yourself longing irrationally for simpler times when men needed only placate their angry gods with sacrifices rather than confront the unsettling reality of nature's unpredictable fury. Your skepticism evaporates like morning dew, replaced by an uneasy acknowledgement of ancient wisdom, painfully ironic, considering your earlier disdain for exactly such beliefs. Standing alone upon trembling ground, facing a mountain whose patience has clearly expired, you bitterly accept that perhaps the ancients truly were right. Perhaps humans never ceased needing their gods, if only to have someone else to blame for their endless foolishness. And with that uncomfortable realization settling coldly into your chest, you remain helplessly rooted, caught somewhere between ironic amusement and mounting terror, watching helplessly as Vesuvius prepares its long overdue reply to humanity's arrogance. Standing on the uneasy slopes of Vesuvius, you watch the wispy column of smoke above the mountain thicken and darken ominously. At first, it seemed harmless, merely another spectacle provided by nature to amuse, confuse, and occasionally terrify mortals. But soon, with mounting dread, you realize that smoke has ceased to be just smoke. The gods, or nature itself, whichever you now prefer, have finally tired of subtlety. The ground shakes again, more violently now. You stumble slightly, instinctively widening your stance to remain upright. Small rocks dislodge themselves, tumbling lazily downward in mocking prelude. With bitter irony, you recall the words of Seneca, who had described earthquakes as the earth sighing, calmly dismissing such events as natural annoyances. At this moment, however, the earth is doing far more than merely sighing. It feels as though the entire mountain is inhaling deeply, gathering strength for a roar that will reverberate through history. From the summit, an enormous column of thick black smoke begins rising in earnest, blossoming upward like a vast pine tree, dark branches stretching out into the pale blue sky. Your heart sinks at this strangely majestic image, for you know precisely what it signifies. Earlier Roman scholars might have calmly debated about the meanings of natural phenomena, but you, trapped now in the unfolding nightmare, find no comfort in such detached intellectualism. Your gaze shifts downward, toward Pompeii and Herculaneum, nestled peacefully and unsuspecting beneath the towering menace. From here, the towns seem small, picturesque, entirely unprepared for the horror awaiting them. You think grimly of the thousands below, still haggling over bread and fish, gossiping idly in bathhouses, or resting quietly in shaded gardens, oblivious to their imminent demise. You feel a pang of helplessness and guilt, knowing the futility of trying to warn them. Even if you could rush down the slopes shouting warnings, who would believe your panicked cries over the comforts of normalcy. In the tense silence that briefly settles over the landscape, you hear distant, muffled cries from the town below, mere echoes carried faintly by the wind. People begin noticing the mountain's shifting mood, and panic gradually seeps into the streets. Tiny figures rush around the distant squares and alleys like ants disturbed by fire. Your ironic side wonders bitterly if any of them now regrets ignoring earlier warnings. The small earthquakes, the minor disruptions, those frequent tremors dismissed so casually as harmless annoyances. Your gaze returns to the monstrous pillar of ash and smoke billowing upward, growing more powerful with each passing heartbeat. The dense cloud obscures sunlight, casting an unnatural shadow across the hillsides. The temperature drops suddenly, an eerie chill replacing the sweltering heat from moments ago. Goosebumps ripple across your skin, partly from the sudden cold, partly from the instinctual realization that you stand too close, a helpless spectator to nature's wrath. Ash begins softly falling around you, first in tiny, delicate flakes, resembling a perverse snowfall. You stretch your hand out to catch a fragment, observing it in stunned disbelief. It rests lightly in your palm, deceptively harmless, merely gray powder, easily brushed away. You almost laugh, bitterly amused at how benign it appears, knowing full well it carries death within each gentle flake. Glancing around, you notice the animals, those wise creatures who sensed trouble long before any human, fleeing the slopes hastily. Birds vanish, dogs howl mournfully in distant streets, and goats clumsily scamper down toward imagined safety. You envy their instincts, wishing humans shared their clarity. Instead, you remain here, irrationally transfixed by the spectacle, rooted by curiosity that threatens to cost dearly. The mountain roars, a deep, guttural rumble resonating through the earth itself, vibrating painfully through your chest. In a deafening instant, the column of smoke violently expands, releasing enormous bursts of debris, shooting skyward in terrifying fury. You shield your eyes as shards of volcanic rock sail high above, mingling dangerously with thickening clouds of ash. Rocks rain down, striking nearby vineyards, pulverizing grapevines, destroying olive groves. Pompeii's fertile prosperity, carefully cultivated for generations, shatters within minutes beneath the fiery wrath. Vesuvius no longer whispers threats, it bellows them, demanding immediate submission. You gaze helplessly upward, painfully aware of your insignificance beneath the volcano's rage. Bits of hot rock and pumice fall closer now, sizzling where they strike dry grass. Flames spring up quickly around you, transforming peaceful slopes into nightmarish vistas of fire and ash. The air thickens, choking you with sulfuric fumes, stinging your eyes and nostrils. Your mind, cruelly ironic even now, recalls how many Romans debated volcanic eruptions as harmless vents, nature's simple exhalations. Today, however, Vesuvius breathes fire, casting aside all intellectual arguments. Today, it has chosen fury. Down below, Pompeii and Herculaneum vanish behind dark, swirling clouds, fading like distant memories. You feel a grim certainty that soon these prosperous towns will cease existing entirely, preserved forever beneath meters of ash, destined for future archaeologists to uncover with stunned fascination. You briefly envy future scholars, safely distant, comfortably curious, marveling over this very catastrophe that threatens your life right now. History has always been filled with such painful ironies. Your feet carry you instinctively downhill, stumbling in panic. Your previous scholarly curiosity finally abandoned, replaced by raw survival instinct. You run, slipping on volcanic soil slick with ash, hearing distant screams echoing from below. Your sandals tear, your tunic ripped by thorny branches. Your lungs ache from smoke inhalation, eyes blurred by tears of pain and fear. You wonder briefly, bitterly amused even now, if this is how history always unfolds. Chaos overtaking civilization, reminding humanity repeatedly of its arrogant vulnerability. Perhaps future scrolls will portray you as nothing more than an anonymous victim, another nameless statistic swept away by volcanic fury. The sky grows darker still, turning an unnatural shade of blackish gray, blotting out daylight entirely. Darkness envelops the landscape, plunging you into a nightmarish twilight. You stumble blindly downward, desperate to escape, yet strangely aware that there might be no escape from something so immense, so overwhelming. Your cynical side, now transformed into fatalistic acceptance, grimly acknowledges that perhaps nature, or those ancient gods you mocked, has won after all. Humans might build cities, write philosophies, and declare themselves masters of creation, but in moments like this, all such arrogance crumbles swiftly into ashes. As you struggle forward, coughing, blinded, battered by falling debris, you realize grimly the smoke has indeed ceased to be just smoke. It has become something infinitely more terrible, a clear and unforgettable message delivered brutally by Vesuvius, reminding humanity of its humble place. And you, unfortunate witness caught on history's cruel stage, finally understand the depth of human folly. Too late to warn, too late to flee, forced to live out the grim irony of standing helplessly beneath the wrathful mountain, awaiting whatever comes next. As you desperately scramble down the treacherous slopes, coughing violently, your throat raw from inhaling volcanic dust, you glimpse an unexpected sight below, ships sailing calmly toward the coast, completely oblivious to the disaster unfolding above. Through the oppressive curtain of ash, these vessels appear surrealistically peaceful, their sails catching the wind as though carrying joyful visitors to a pleasant seaside destination. The irony nearly chokes you. These ships do not sail toward leisure, they sail unknowingly toward catastrophe itself. Your pulse quickens as you recall, with bitter amusement, that among those ships sails none other than Pliny the Elder, the renowned scholar, admiral, and tireless natural historian. Pliny, famous throughout the Roman Empire for his extensive writings on nature and for his relentless curiosity, seems to possess a truly unfortunate knack for placing himself directly in harm's way. And today, You bitterly realize he has chosen the most dangerous theater imaginable for his scholarly adventures. Your rapidly disintegrating landscape, panting, wiping soot from your eyes, you stagger toward the harbor, hoping desperately to reach safety aboard one of those distant vessels. The thickening ash clouds turn daylight to a sinister dusk, disorienting you as you stumble forward, colliding painfully with abandoned farming tools and overturned carts. Your sandals skid over debris strewn paths, stumbling past empty houses whose residents fled moments ago, leaving behind scattered belongings, cooking pots, toys, half eaten meals, abandoned abruptly in mid action. The eerie emptiness chills you, providing yet another grim reminder of nature's ruthless disregard for human routine. Reaching the harbor, you witness the first sailors disembarking hurriedly, bewildered and frightened. You spot him immediately, Pliny himself, stout and determined, stepping confidently ashore, commanding his men with practiced authority. He gestures dramatically toward the erupting volcano, shouting orders amidst the chaos, eager eyes gleaming with an excitement far too inappropriate for the disaster surrounding him. His infamous curiosity, one that has filled countless scrolls with painstaking detail, is evident now in every frantic movement, in each barked command. You realize grimly that Pliny, tragically unaware of the severity, sees not horror, but opportunity, a chance to study nature's wrath firsthand. You approach him instinctively, waving your arms frantically, shouting warnings in a voice broken by choking dust and smoke. Yet, Pliny barely notices, instead, ordering sailors to load supplies and prepare rescue boats. You admire his bravery while bitterly acknowledging the dangerous foolishness of it all. Indeed, his scholarly pursuits have ironically turned him into history's most tragically enthusiastic spectator. Standing nearby, Pliny scribbles hurriedly into wax tablets, detailing the eruption's progress with obsessive accuracy, documenting the exact shade of ash falling from the sky, the direction of wind currents, the temperature changes around him. He mutters excitedly about the geological wonders unfolding. For a moment, you almost envy his detached fascination, but only briefly, as a fresh hail of hot pumice reminds you of your increasingly precarious situation. A panicked sailor rushes forward, pleading for immediate departure, but Pliny dismisses him impatiently, determined to stay and observe longer. You bitterly recognize in him the same human arrogance that led Pompeii and Herculaneum to flourish beneath a volcano they refused to fear. The irony is not lost on you. Rome's greatest scholar, an intellectual giant who devoted his life to understanding nature, stubbornly ignores the dire warnings nature now screams at him from every direction. Pliny finally acknowledges you, his gaze intense, asking hurriedly if you've observed anything unusual higher up the mountain. You nearly laugh. Unusual hardly describes it. Between gasps, you describe the relentless earthquakes, the deadly pumice, and choking ash. His eyes widen in fascination, but not fear, immediately scribbling your panicked descriptions onto his tablet. You understand now, with grim resignation, that scholars like him see only knowledge, never danger, never tragedy. Another violent tremor shakes the earth, knocking you both to the ground. Around you, sailors scatter, screaming warnings of incoming waves and debris. You scramble upright, urging Pliny again to flee immediately, yet he stubbornly insists on gathering more observations, absurdly determined to record every aspect of this catastrophic event. Your patience breaks. His scholarly stubbornness has crossed into madness. In the distance, a thunderous explosion reverberates, showering the harbor with burning embers and sharp volcanic rock. People scream, fleeing toward ships, desperate to escape. You watch helplessly as waves grow violent, battering the vessels against the dock. Amidst this chaos, Pliny remains stubbornly rooted, still dictating notes, oblivious to the very real peril around him. A sailor finally grabs his arm, pleading urgently. Reluctantly, Pliny yields, allowing himself to be hurried aboard a rescue boat. You follow hastily, stumbling aboard, gasping for breath. As you cast off from shore, waves crash violently around the small craft, threatening to overturn it at any moment. You bitterly note the cruel irony. Nature itself now conspires to keep you prisoner, forcing you to watch this historical nightmare unfold. Out on the water, conditions worsen rapidly. Hot ash and pumice rain down relentlessly, choking sailors and passengers alike. The horizon vanishes beneath dark, swirling clouds. Pliny, meanwhile, gasps for breath, weakened by inhaling volcanic fumes. His earlier scholarly enthusiasm fades rapidly, replaced by grim realization. He now understands, far too late, the real human cost behind nature's spectacular fury. Hours pass in chaotic darkness, sailing blindly amidst volcanic debris. The choking air becomes unbearably thick, stinging your eyes and throat. Nearby, Pliny coughs violently, collapsing weakly against the boat's wooden planks, realizing too late the tragic folly of his quest. His scholarly curiosity, once so noble, now seems bitterly absurd. You feel profound sorrow, tempered by the harsh awareness that history often requires tragic figures to teach future generations painful lessons about humility. Finally, exhausted and battered, your boat reaches safer waters. You glance back toward shore, unable to see Pompeii or Herculaneum, those prosperous towns now forever sealed beneath meters of ash, condemned to become historical artifacts. You glance sadly toward Pliny, whose condition rapidly deteriorates, knowing now with brutal clarity that he too has become another artifact, an eternal example of human hubris, tragic curiosity, and noble folly. Pliny gazes upward one last time, whispering faintly about nature's magnificent power, words lost amidst coughing fits. His scholarly dedication tragically fulfilled, yet useless now, as his life slips away quietly beneath a darkened sky. You watch helplessly, grief stricken, yet grimly aware of history's ironic patterns, in which human curiosity, however noble, often leads tragically astray. Pliny's life fades gently amid chaos, leaving you haunted by his final lesson, one you bitterly recognize now as truly timeless. that the line between curiosity and disaster has always been dangerously thin. You realize bitterly, sailing onward beneath smoky skies, that historians will forever recall Pliny not merely for his writings, but tragically for his fatal insistence on observing firsthand the wrath of Vesuvius. And you, reluctant witness to this bitterly ironic tragedy, know now more clearly than ever how easily humanity's thirst for knowledge can lead directly into disaster's relentless embrace. Days later, you stand wearily upon a distant shoreline, staring silently back toward the blurred, smoking outline of Vesuvius on the horizon. The volcano, finally sated, has retreated into quiet menace once more, leaving behind an eerie stillness that hangs like fog over the ruined landscape. The terrible wrath you witnessed, ash clouds, roaring explosions, and deadly torrents of fire, now feels impossibly distant, yet its cruel irony lingers painfully clear. Pompeii and Herculaneum, those thriving Roman towns, whose inhabitants had awakened that fateful morning expecting nothing but ordinary routine, now lie buried deep beneath thick layers of volcanic ash, stone, and pumice. The fertile vineyards, the prosperous markets, even the vibrant murals adorning peaceful villas, all gone, trapped in a moment frozen forever in volcanic fury. You shiver slightly, despite the warm sunlight. Memories flood your mind relentlessly, panicked screams echoing through dark streets, animals fleeing in terror, even Pliny's tragic final hours. Each vivid recollection deepens your grim realization that beneath your feet, hidden beneath meters of hardened volcanic material, countless human stories remain abruptly unfinished. With bitter irony, you reflect on the inevitable. Someday, these buried towns will resurface, dug up by curious archaeologists armed with nothing more dangerous than shovels, brushes, and boundless fascination. Future generations, safe in distant centuries, will marvel innocently at the remarkable preservation, perhaps casually commenting on the surprising lifelike quality of plaster casts capturing victims in their final moments. You bitterly envy their safe detachment. They will see not tragedy, but historical spectacle, comfortably distant from the cruel human toll of nature's fury. You imagine future classrooms filled with bored students studying ancient history, yawning through dry lectures about Vesuvius and its catastrophic eruption. Teachers will drone monotonously, unaware that the boredom of their listeners mirrors your own once dismissive attitude toward natural disasters, history, and human arrogance. Students, meanwhile, will barely register the tragic irony. Each figure frozen in ash was once alive, vibrant, and blissfully unaware of impending doom. Yet perhaps this cruel irony holds a valuable lesson, a grim reminder that human civilization remains forever fragile, forever at nature's mercy. You recall how Pompeians had confidently built their lives beneath a known threat, ignoring warning signs until it was too late. Even Pliny, the great observer of nature himself, paid dearly for his scholarly obsession, ironically blinded by the very curiosity that made him legendary. You smile darkly, recognizing how little humanity ever changes. Today's tragedy becomes tomorrow's historical curiosity. Yesterday's warnings dismissed, forgotten, until another eruption inevitably repeats history's brutal cycle. Future towns and cities, confident in their perceived safety, will once again flourish beneath dormant volcanoes, forgetting lessons bitterly learned and tragically ignored by Pompeii and Herculaneum. With a resigned sigh, you begin walking slowly along the beach, sand shifting beneath your sandals. Each step carries a painful awareness. You survived only by chance, a fortunate accident. History, you realize grimly, rarely records the countless anonymous individuals like yourself who stumbled desperately through disasters, whose lives hung briefly by fragile threads of luck. Nearby, fishermen resume casting their nets into calm, indifferent seas. Farmers, oblivious to distant tragedies, harvest crops and prune olive trees, absorbed in comforting routines. Life continues, unchanged and indifferent, stubbornly ignoring the grim reminders nature periodically delivers. You shake your head bitterly. How soon humans forget that peaceful landscapes often mask deadly secrets. The irony deepens as you imagine future tourists flocking eagerly toward newly excavated ruins, wandering carelessly through ancient streets once filled with laughter, commerce, and daily routines now tragically petrified in ash. They'll snap cheerful images, marveling at frescoes and mosaics, utterly disconnected from the quiet horror embedded within each artifact. To them, Pompeii will become simply another historical curiosity, a mere highlight on a tourist map rather than a haunting reminder of humanity's fragile arrogance. Your thoughts drift again toward Pliny, his final hours, the stubborn insistence on documenting disaster firsthand. You bitterly acknowledge he would have relished knowing how thoroughly future scholars would study his tragic final journey. Yet his story, too, will inevitably fade, becoming nothing more than a footnote alongside countless other historical tragedies, stories briefly told, then forgotten as humanity stumbles onward toward the next inevitable disaster. Pausing, you glance backward once more toward distant Vesuvius. The mountain seems utterly peaceful now, draped once more in gentle sunlight, deceptively calm beneath a clear sky. Yet, beneath its tranquil facade lurks unrelenting menace, an eternal reminder that human civilization remains forever temporary, forever fragile beneath nature's casual indifference. You wonder darkly if future generations will heed your bitter lesson, that prosperity often breeds complacency, that arrogance blinds people to subtle warnings, that history stubbornly repeats itself with cruel inevitability. Yet, deep down, you suspect humans will always prefer comfortable ignorance to uncomfortable vigilance. The cruel cycle will continue endlessly. Peaceful towns built atop volcanic slopes, warnings ignored, tragedies unfolding, stories forgotten, excavated, and eventually admired as historical curiosities. With weary resignation, you sit upon a driftwood log, staring quietly out toward the endless horizon. Seabirds wheel lazily above gentle waves, utterly indifferent to the human suffering so recently endured. Life returns quickly to normalcy, humanity's greatest strength and its cruelest irony. The afternoon sun begins dipping lower toward the horizon, casting soft golden light across the gentle surf. Gradually, your painful memories soften slightly, merging into distant historical context. You know, with grim acceptance, that soon enough your story, your personal encounter with Vesuvius's wrath, will itself fade quietly into obscurity, becoming nothing more than a faint historical whisper echoing gently through distant centuries. Yet perhaps this quiet fading offers its own solace, a subtle reminder that humans, despite their arrogance, remain eternally connected by shared vulnerability. Pompeii, Herculaneum, Pliny himself, even your anonymous journey, all embody this fragile humanity, constantly balancing arrogant confidence against nature's unpredictable fury. Rising slowly, you walk onward, leaving footprints gradually erased by incoming tides. Behind you, the distant silhouette of Vesuvius stands quietly, patient and eternal, awaiting the next opportunity to remind humanity of its humble place. You imagine future generations laughing carelessly beneath similar slopes, oblivious to warnings already learned, yet soon forgotten. You smile bitterly, shaking your head. History, it seems, will always be written by survivors, those fortunate or cautious enough to evade disaster's grasp. But beneath every historical lesson lurks humanity's eternal irony, that warnings learned once are rarely remembered forever. Thus, Pompeii and Herculaneum, thriving Roman towns, transformed cruelly overnight into eternal archaeological curiosities, remain powerful yet fragile symbols. They illustrate humanity's endless cycle: prosperity breeding arrogance, warnings dismissed, catastrophe endured, lessons briefly learned, and eventually forgotten. And so you move forward, an anonymous survivor of history's cruel joke, comforted slightly by knowing that someday your story, too, might offer a quiet warning to future generations, provided, of course, they bother listening. Yet deep inside, you suspect bitterly that humans never truly listen, at least not for long. History, after all, repeats itself endlessly, patiently awaiting the next Pompeii, the next Herculaneum, the next Pliny, tragically curious, eternally stubborn, forever doomed to relearn lessons painfully forgotten.